Chapter 3: War in Liberia. A full-scale war broke out in Liberia in 1989 when Charles Taylor, the then leader of the National Patriotic Front of Liberia (NPFL), in an attempt to assume the reign of power from President Doe, attacked Liberia from his base on the Ivory Coast. The attack was partially successful, and by August of 1990, the Charles Taylor-led NPFL controlled nearly the entire country. At some point, Prince Johnson, one of Charles Taylor's commanders, parted company with his former boss and formed Independent National Patriotic Front of Liberia (INPFL). This was initially set up to unseat President Doe. However, Prince Johnson and his troop later teamed up with President Doe to fight Charles Taylor. The Liberian Civil War raised troubling concern for African states, and especially members of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Member states feared that if left unchecked, the problem in Liberia would metastasize to other countries in the region. Encouraged by Nigeria, ECOWAS, after some internal wrangles and maneuvers, decided to send a peacekeeping force to Liberia to impose a ceasefire and to end the civil war. The ECOWAS troops, known as the Economic Community of West African States Monitoring Group (ECOMOG), arrived Liberia on August 27, 1990. During the summit of the ECOWAS Standing Committee, member states had pledged to contribute 4,000 troops. But on August 24, 1990, when the first batch of peacekeepers arrived Monrovia, ECOMOG had only 2,600 troops drawn from Gambia, Ghana, Guinea, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. The peacekeeping force was commanded by Lieutenant General Arnold Queno from Ghana. The land component of the initial ECOMOG force was comprised of contingents from Gambia, which sent one rifle company, Ghana, which sent 1,982 of 1 infantry battalion troops, armored reconnaissance, a battery of medium mortars, a detachment of engineers, and naval and sea detachments, and Guinea, which sent 1 infantry battalion, squadron tanks, troop armored reconnaissance, battery air defense, and 3 patrol boats. Nigeria contributed 1 infantry battalion, which was later increased to 3, 1 artillery regiment, squadron tanks, 1 anti-tank company, and a troop reconnaissance. The naval task force included the NNS Ambe, NNS Bama, NNS Danisa, NNS Ekpe, NNS Ohui, NNS Siri, and a tugboat. Ghana also sent 2 naval ships. The air component of the ECOMOG force was initially composed of 4 Ghanaian Air Force fighter ground attack Machis and 1 F-27 transport plane. Nigeria later sent 6 Alpha jets and helicopters to replace the aircraft from Ghana. The reaction of the warring faction to peacekeepers differed markedly. President Doe and Yomi Johnson welcomed the peacekeeping arrangement and praised ECOMOG for its attempt to restore peace and order in Liberia.
We will fight to the last man. I will get weapons from wherever I have to get it. If the Pentagon's got some, please give me some. I'll use it.
Charles Taylor, who all along felt that he had an upper hand in the struggle for the power in Liberia, stoutly opposed efforts by ECOWAS to mediate the Liberian conflict. He openly declared war on ECOMOG and ordered his troops to attack peacekeepers. Even with the presence of peacekeepers, the warring factions violently opposed each other, maiming and killing whomever stood in their way to power. In early September of 1990, Johnson's henchmen arrested and eventually killed President Doe. The gruesome torture and murder of Doe was videotaped and widely circulated, apparently to convince the people that Doe was dead, but more importantly to warn people of the dangers that would surely befall anybody who opposed Johnson. With Doe out of the way, Johnson's forces directed their sights and guns to Charles Taylor and his NPFL. ECOMOG had no selfish interest or stake in the Liberia conflict. Its main and perhaps only goal was restoration of social equilibrium in Liberia. Regrettably, ECOMOG troops who came in to maintain peace became targets for attack from all sides. Peacekeepers quickly became marked men and were forced to defend themselves against limitless and unrestrained violent attacks. ECOMOG troops tried with varying degrees of success to achieve the group's mandate in Liberia. They tried to stand between the factions and maintain peace. This turned out to be very problematic as several peace accords were regularly and systematically broken and violated by factional leaders obsessed with achieving their objective of gaining control of the nation's machinery of government. Charles Taylor from the beginning showed little regard for ECOMOG. He publicly voiced his contempt for the peacekeeping efforts and accused Nigeria of planning to kill him. These utterances by Charles Taylor did not help matters, as thugs fiercely loyal to him were determined to do whatever he asked them to do. Charles Taylor wanted just one thing: power, and the only thing that stood between him and his ambition was ECOMOG. My first contact with Liberia was in 1992 when I was appointed the Chief of Staff of ECOMOG and the Nigerian Contingent Commander from June 1992 to June 1993. My deployment to Liberia marked a significant turning point in my career. Though I had trained for warfare, I had never been to war. I spent most of my time doing what soldiers do in peacetime: training, attending courses, and doing administrative work. But all the while, a part of me had been itching to see combat. So I was excited when I was posted to Liberia. I finally had a chance to practice what I had trained for, a chance to fight. It may well be that after years of doing administrative work, I, in a strange way, needed the thrill of war. As I prepared for Liberia, my mind continued to race with thoughts about the dangers of war and what I had learned at the Nigerian Defense Academy. On October 15, 1992, Taylor's NPFL attacked Monrovia. The factional fighting was so intense that I never believed I was going to make it back to Nigeria alive. We took fire from all angles and it was difficult to ascertain who was shooting at us. The warring factions consisted of thugs with no formal military training. These thugs, finding themselves in unsupervised and dangerous situations, unleashed havoc and mayhem on society. Everybody along their way had to be mowed down or butchered, including women, children, and ECOMOG peacekeepers. In the confusion that ensued, ECOMOG troops remained calm and displayed extraordinary courage in the face of danger. The battle raged on for 4 days until ECOMOG troops recovered from the shock and started to overpower the NPFL. In the end, we succeeded in chasing the rebels out of Monrovia. It was when it became obvious to Charles Taylor that he could not assume leadership through violence that he decided to go back to the negotiating table. After 1 year, when it seemed as if we had achieved our objectives, I was posted back to Nigeria. In 1996, I came back to Liberia, this time as the ECOMOG Force Commander. Prior to my appointment, ECOMOG had been blessed with fine commanders, including Lieutenant General Arnold Queno from Ghana, who served as the first ECOMOG Field Commander. Lieutenant General Joshua Dogonyaru, who served from September 1990 to February of 1991. Lieutenant General Rufus Kupolati, February 1991 to September 1991. Major General Ishaya Bakut, under whom I served briefly as the Chief of Staff from September 1991 to October 1992. Major General Adetunji Olorin, with whom I served until my posting back to Nigeria in June 1993. October 1992 to 1993. Brigadier General John Shagaya, October 1993 to December 1993. And Major General John Mark Inyenge, December 1993 to August 1996. Going to war is never an easy task. Having to stand between two mortal enemies bent on killing each other was even more problematic. Liberia presented a unique set of problems. The warring factions consisted of thugs, criminals, and hoodlums who had no respect for human life. They cared only about taking control of the machinery of government by any means necessary. When I received my assignment, intellectually I felt I could handle it. After all, I had received my training in the art of warfare from some of the finest military minds in the world. Emotionally, however, I entertained some elements of self-doubt. Would I make it out alive? What if my troop failed to live up to their training? What about my family? Whatever I felt did not matter very much. I had my orders to move and I had no choice. I put together my belongings, made some phone calls, talked to my wife and family, and went to bed. I slept fairly well for some time only to find myself awake and again lost in thoughts. If I failed, my generation and indeed history would be very unkind to me. I quickly numbed such doubts by reminding myself that I had voluntarily chosen to join the army and that war was part of the process and indeed a rite of passage for any soldier who wished to make his mark in battle. If I did well, I could join the exalted rank. These comforting feelings overpowered whatever doubts I had and I dozed off. I woke up the next morning feeling very good. I got ready, packed my suitcase, and drove to the airport to board a military aircraft due to convey some supplies to Liberia. The 4-hour flight to Liberia was uneventful. I was met at the airport by Brigadier General Mbe, from whom I was to take over as Chief of Staff and Nigerian Contingent Commander. After 2 weeks, I met with military commanders on ground and reviewed our operations. I had approximately 5,000 soldiers under my watch drawn from different West African countries. I also met with a detachment of soldiers and addressed them on the need to be vigilant. Upon my arrival in Monrovia, I addressed the troops at the ECOMOG base. As I addressed them, I took notice of all kinds of expression on their faces: fear, readiness, and determination. Each soldier stood by himself, equipped with the knowledge and training he had received from his country. I didn't expect the level of readiness or discipline to be the same with every soldier, since the ECOMOG was made up of different West African countries. The curious and concerned look on their faces made me even more determined to give them maximum protection and direction. They should not be needlessly exposed to avoidable danger and risk. I saw determined soldiers who were ready to kill or die to bring peace to a troubled land. They looked very calm. I do not know the source of their calmness. It may have been their training that prepared them for the mission on hand. It could have been their appreciation of the nobility of their task. Liberia still showed signs of war and civil unrest that had ravaged the former American colony for over 15 years. Factional leaders, in their maddening desire to attain power, had violated human rights, curtailed liberties and freedoms, and unleashed a reign of terror on their fellow citizens. Armed bandits still roamed the streets. Buildings had been destroyed, and the ones standing were covered in bullet holes. Life was unsafe despite efforts by ECOMOG to restore social equilibrium. The opportunity to personally witness the horrors of the Civil War made me more determined to bring an end to the conflict. The Liberian conflict posed unique challenges. The theater of the conflict consisted of urban areas where innocent civilians found themselves caught between two hostile groups. Regular rules of war simply would not apply in this case. We had to devise strategies to achieve our objective without unnecessary collateral damage. There were no established front lines or fixed positions. The thugs were scattered all over Liberia. With supplies running from neighboring countries, the rules of warfare simply did not apply. The thugs were not stationed in any particular place. They roamed the cities, striking wherever, whenever they chose. I was, however, determined to push all buttons that would lift Liberia from the cauldron of war and strife and put it on the path to constitutional democracy. This time around, I knew the environment, the key players, and their modus operandi. It was therefore much easier for me to quickly assume control of the terrain. Prior to my departure, I issued a press release in Abuja in which I stated, to the best of my knowledge, security in Liberia was the responsibility of ECOMOG, and that no other person or group of persons was supposed to bear arms, especially in the city of Monrovia. I expected the factions to make reasonable efforts to support the peace plan set forth by ECOWAS. I made it known to all factional leaders that ECOMOG had effective retaliatory capacity and would not hesitate to respond to any attacks. I suspected and indeed hoped that Charles Taylor was listening to me. Charles Taylor had a visceral contempt for the peacekeeping mission initiated by ECOWAS. He had long railed against ECOMOG for singling him out for special treatment. The truth was that Charles Taylor, desperate to assume power in Liberia, saw ECOMOG as the only thing standing in his way to power. He therefore resorted to cheap blackmail and veiled threats to undermine and undercut ECOMOG. His complaints arose from personal ambition and greed and lacked substance. I made it clear that ECOMOG would not succumb to his ploy. He became venomously angry when it became clear that ECOMOG would not be deterred by his histrionics. He was therefore determined to undermine the efforts of ECOMOG to restore peace to Liberia. My first order of business was to secure the area by making sure that we took control of the major areas of Monrovia. That done, I set out to disarm the factions. I knew from intelligence and field reports that there were stockpiles of ammunition in different parts of Liberia that were accessible to the factional leaders and their thugs. Unless we got to those arms, they would eventually be turned against my men. In an interview with journalists, I stated the philosophy that animated the military operations. I stated that to disarm, you must be professional and be prepared to give a bloody nose to anybody who tries to subvert the process. Either you are there to enforce peace with all your might, or you leave your troops at the mercy of armed bandits. My life, and indeed the lives of my troops, could not be left to the good faith or voluntary self-restraint on the part of the warring factions not to shoot at us. Given their history and the actions of their antecedents, allowing them to retain their weapons would have led to catastrophic consequences for my troops. In a well-ordained and sustained fashion, I set about disarming the factions and their thugs. I cordoned off key and strategic areas of the town and methodically searched the area for arms. The key was the element of surprise, and I ordered the searches conducted at all times of the day. Residents woke up in the morning only to find their area had been cordoned off for a search. The searches were intense and thorough. We went through every nook and corner of every house looking for arms. Nobody was spared, including Charles Taylor, who tried very hard to mask his displeasure over the strategy. I remember the first call I got from Charles Taylor. He stated, "General Malu, I don't like you, but I still respect you. I heard your press conference in Abuja when you said you were going to conduct searches of all the factional leaders. You started with me. I think I admire you." I thanked him and told him that as the person in charge of security, I needed to know who was firing at me so that I could take the blame should anything happen. The best the frustrated Charles Taylor and his thugs could do was to sporadically attack ECOMOG troops. With time, ECOMOG took back the city of Monrovia, street by street, building by building. Much as I did not particularly like Charles Taylor, I refrained from personalizing my mission. I was going to even-handedly deal with the warring factions. I made it clear to all concerned that I was not interested in involving myself or my troops in their local politics. I had one job and one job alone: to carry out the ECOMOG mandate of maintaining peace. It did not take long for my resolve to be tested. By October, there was an attempt to assassinate Charles Taylor in the executive mansion. As the force commander, I would have allowed my subordinates, especially the chief of staff and director of operations, to handle the matter, but for some reason I decided to take over the operation. Within a matter of minutes, approximately 10 minutes actually, we saturated the whole of Monrovia with ECOMOG troops. Residents were surprised by the number of ECOMOG soldiers in Liberia. We used helicopters, ships, and land vehicles. My main aim was to keep everybody at standstill and prevent the warring factions from accessing their arms. Charles Taylor threatened to leave and argued that maybe I had been sent back to kill him because of the bad blood between him and the former ECOMOG commander, General Olorin. I knew Charles Taylor too well to allow such blackmail to derail me. I also suspected that he knew that I was determined to rid Monrovia of the criminal elements and thugs who threatened peace and tranquility in Liberia, which had been relatively peaceful until April, when violence has erupted once again. The fighting was in Monrovia. ECOMOG withdrew to his base and allowed the factions to sort things out.
Force that succeeded in disarming the former warring factions in the country, thereby creating the atmosphere for the special July 19th general and presidential election, has been recalled to take up a new assignment in his country. Indeed, General Malu has left his footprints on the sand of time that generations to come will forever remember this fine and no-nonsense African soldier. We recall that the outgoing force commander took over helm of affairs of the ECOMOG forces weeks after the April 6, 1996 factional fighting which devastated the city of Monrovia. Shortly upon his takeover, General Malu rebuilt confidence among the factions. Also, he professionally and maturedly handled the October 31st assassination attempt on the life of the then councilman Charles Taylor, now president at the Executive Mansion. Similarly, we note with satisfaction the security modus operandi employed during the electoral process, which made the process to become free and fair. Initially, when the campaign started with violence in some areas, the general sent out a strong warning that if you throw stone at others during the campaign, ECOMOG will be constrained to throw bullets. This warning sent a clear message to the would-be troublemakers, thus making the process go ahead without any major violence. At the same time, the general also built confidence and hope in the electorate in the wake of fear that if some of those who were contesting the polls did not win, they would resort to violence. At that time, the general assured the citizens that they should go about their normal business as no faction had the capacity to wage war after the election, as the peacekeepers had been successful in incapacitating all of them. As we wish the general farewell for his dedication, commitment, devotion, and sense of purpose and mission, we still recall at one point that we differed with him when he said that the real enemies of the Liberian people were the press. We are now convinced that at the end of his mission, he has now realized that the real enemies of the Liberian people, the press, is only a partner in progress, whose function and role are at times misconstrued by selfish and power-greedy individuals. To the general, we say well done for restoring sanity to this country. Well done for disarming the warring factions. Well done for ushering in the first democratically elected government after 7 years of war. And lastly, we say well done for being impartial during your mission here. In the Liberian way, we say goodbye. Your morale is high. It can't get cold.
As the words of the editorial occupied my consciousness, a certain sense of relief overpowered me. My stay in Liberia had made a difference. I had brought peace to a country and provided an enabling environment for elections that ultimately produced an elected civilian president. All my prior accomplishments paled in comparison to the success I had achieved in Liberia. I had not failed my country. These thoughts provided great comfort and reassurance to me. My troops had performed superbly in Liberia. They had given hope to the hopeless and provided peace. I was not therefore going to allow detractors to cheat me or my troops of the well-deserved accolade. The New York Times, writing about my tour of duty in Liberia, observed that before his arrival, West African soldiers occupying Liberia were degenerating into an antagonistic and resented force that was demanding small bribes, turning the blind eye to looting and letting factions to fight on. Since then, General Malu's strict discipline and his tough threats to the faction leaders, the country has calmed down. The highly personal military justice here, coupled with statements by many diplomats, made it clear that General Malu is the real ruler of Liberia, and he is almost universally praised for it. The true heroes of the ECOMOG operations in Liberia were the soldiers on the front lines, in the streets of Liberia and in the dark alleys of Monrovia, fighting armed bandits and hoodlums who had no qualms about taking innocent lives. They witnessed firsthand the macabre part of war fought with brutal and indiscriminate intensity. The ECOMOG soldiers risked everything to contain the warring factions. Some did not survive. Some who survived are scarred physically and emotionally by horrors they witnessed and experienced. I suspect, however, that these brave soldiers found an enhanced sense of self-worth and a new meaning of their lives as they helped fellow human beings to live in peace. I remember the words of Anthony Swofford, a retired United States Marine and author of Jarhead, a Marine's Chronicle of the Gulf War and Other Battles, who said, "The men who go to war and live are spared for the single purpose of spreading bad news when they return. The bad news about the way war is fought and why and by whom, and the more men who survive the war, the higher the number of men who might speak." I hope that African countries will learn from Liberian experience the futility of attempting to resolve political questions through violence. On January 10, 1997, 18 months after I arrived at Liberia as the ECOMOG commander, I boarded the aircraft for Nigeria to assume duties as the General Officer Commanding of the 2nd Mechanized Division of the Nigerian Army in Ibadan. I have refused to speculate on why I was not allowed to undertake a complete restructuring of the Liberian Army before I was recalled. Some have insinuated that my frosty relationship with Charles Taylor was the motivating factor. This may have been instigated by Charles Taylor's comments during a trip to Nigeria in December 1997 when he stated, "I don't accuse him of running a parallel government, but I said I would not permit him to run a parallel government." My own feeling is that I don't think the president of Nigeria has ever encouraged that as far as I'm concerned. He further stated, "There has been an elected government in Liberia. No military personnel in Liberia would disrespect me. I don't think any Nigerian authority would tolerate that, and I have warned that if he did not stop, we would ask that he be recalled or I would expel him." Charles Taylor's rhetoric was nothing more than political posturing designed to whip up sentiments among his supporters. I was unimpressed by his tirades and unmoved by his threats. I had the mandate and support of the ECOMOG and was determined to achieve ECOMOG's objectives. I had come to believe that Charles Taylor was a man ruled by greed and lust for power who would revel in my failure or humiliation. I would have been surprised if he had anything complimentary to say about me. Others believed that my popularity was becoming a source of concern for some people back home in Nigeria. Whatever may have been the reason, it did not matter very much. The fact was that I received my deployment orders and I had to obey superior orders. Soldiers do not have much say about why they are deployed. The key is to do your job very well in whatever setting you find yourself. I took great solace and comfort that I had done my job well. Writing about my performance as ECOMOG commander, Nigeria's This Day newspaper of Tuesday, January 20th, 1997, editorialized that by successfully commanding the peacekeeping body, Malu has done Nigeria proud. His performance has without doubt improved Nigeria's rating in the international arena. We congratulate General Malu and the entire ECOMOG contingent. It is gratifying that their mission in Liberia ended on a good note. They went, they fought, and they conquered. Upon arriving in Lagos, I issued a statement that clearly captured my sentiments regarding my assignments in Liberia.
The performance of the members of the armed forces of Nigeria in Sierra Leone and in Liberia is something that the whole sub-region is talking about, except in Nigeria. Other countries recognize it and present medals or whatever certificate or something to those soldiers, except in Nigeria. I think by this organization arranging this today, it will also prompt those who are supposed to do this to recognize these officers and men, some of whom are still in Liberia and in Sierra Leone.
Rules on NTA News.
Today, Liberia enjoys relative peace and security because of the blood, sweat, and tears of gallant men and women of this sub-region led by our great country, Nigeria. It is a feat which we should all be proud of because it has never been done anywhere else. We have proved to the world that once the will is there, nothing is really impossible. Liberia has settled its leadership peacefully, and it is noteworthy that we created the enabling environment for them to do so. It is my hope that the peace which has been obtained at so high a cost will be preserved by those whom it has now been bequeathed. To fail in nurturing and assuring that peace would be an unforgivable blunder, and it could cost that country dearly. Although I would have appreciated an opportunity to complete the restructuring of the armed forces of Liberia as envisaged under the Abuja Agreement for Liberia, and also taking ECOMOG troops to Sierra Leone, I cannot argue against the tide of events. I am confident that my able successor can complete whatever task is left uncompleted. With that statement, I closed the book of my life as ECOMOG commander and turned my attention to my new and very familiar task of serving as the General Officer commanding the 2nd Mechanized Division, Ibadan.